Hello. Thank you for coming. Welcome. Everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, good. I'm Jennifer Hamilton. I worked for 26 years in the software industry before retirement and taking our boat trip around the world. Together with James, I've traveled 110,000 miles and lived aboard for 12 years. And I really came to enjoy the unique freedoms and experiences you get traveling around the world in a small boat, and also having the opportunity to share those experiences with others. What we're going to do in this talk is James is going to give a kind of an overview of the trip, quick overview of the trip and the boat, and then talk about some of the important rigging and things that we did that worked well for us, and some of our systems that helped us manage the trip underway with just 2 people on board. And then I'll cover a few logistics, things like how we're clearing in and out, weather routing, things like that. And then we'll do a quick highlight, kind of a quick blast around the world to cover some of the highlights of our trip. James?
Cool. I'm James Hamilton, Senior Vice President and Extinguished Engineer at Amazon. And before that, I was an auto mechanic, and that background is wildly more useful when you're around boats than my current one. I've spent about 35 years in engineering. Really love it, and boats captured the interests of Jennifer and I about 21 years ago. We hadn't boated our entire lives, and what happened is we just got excited by boating and bought a boat, and from that point on, every waking moment we're either at work or on the boat. And so, Jennifer would wait for me outside the building Friday night, and we'd usually arrive back either Sunday night or sometimes Monday morning. So did a lot of boating for those first few years, enjoyed it greatly. Where this came from is probably about 15 or 20 years ago, probably 15, a friend of ours that had really experienced cruisers, a pair of cruisers that have been, extensive experience around with ocean crossing, blue water experience, and they said, James, look, Jen, you got to be a little bit careful. You get tired when you get older. They were about 70 at the time, and they said, it's fine, but it's just a little harder to be on watch in the middle of the night. It just gets a little bit more work. And so if you're serious about this, you really ought to get out and get it done. And it's tough. It's really tough because Jennifer and I both had the best jobs of our lives. Super, just having a wonderful time, and we both love work. And so it's crazy to even think about stepping away from work. And so it really didn't. That comment they made was sitting in the back of my mind, but it wasn't. We never really talked about it. And one night we were sitting on our boat in the back deck, beautiful summer day, had a glass of wine, and I don't know what happened. I said to Jennifer, "What would you think about a quick blast around the world?" And she said, "Yeah, that would be great." And just that non-discussion was the beginning of a decade of adventure. That brief little bit. We both just felt like it felt right. I guess we both had so many experiences and been part of those same conversations. So we decided we'd do it. We'll quit our jobs and we'll boat around the world. And so we got going on that. Neither one of us were super successful at quitting our jobs. Jennifer kept working until Hawaii, and I was on a plan where after Hawaii, it was like, just do 3 more months. We'll get these things done and then underway. And, 3 more months became 3 more months and became 3 more months. And, a decade later, it was still, I'm back in Seattle. I don't think I'm on the 3 more month plan, but I should ask. Maybe it's possible. Still on probation. Yeah, so that was kind of sort of a weird way to cruise around the world. Bad news and good news. The good news is obvious. Like we weren't capable financially to just retire. Like that wasn't going to happen. So the good news is we've got money coming in. That helps. That pays the bills. The bad news is working full time is full time. It slows you down dramatically. It means that this 2-year blast around the world just couldn't happen. It's going to take a long time. And the good thing about a long time, like it sounds bad to take a long time, but in fact, it's great. We spent, if you go visit somewhere, you're there for 2 weeks. you just don't know the place. I mean, it's fun to visit places for 2 weeks at a time, but when you spend a month there, it's different. When you live somewhere, it's different. So we lived in Hawaii for 4 months. We lived in New Zealand for 9 months. 7 months. We lived in Australia for 19 months. We lived in London for a month. I'd be working in the mornings, and you look up, and there's the Tower Bridge right there. It's just so cool. And so the work thing was just not really wasn't really getting in the way. In fact, all the disadvantages felt like advantages by the time we got through it. We just, we spent a year in Norway. I mean, we know Norway extremely well. We spent 6 months in Sweden and Finland. We know it reasonably well. Really enjoyed it. Spent 8 months just in Amsterdam. We love Amsterdam. It's just a fantastic place. And in between all of that, lots and lots and lots of times in the wild. And the way we work is we kind of go 2 modes. If we're going to be around people, we want to be downtown, and we want to be in the middle, most busiest, fun place possible. And the rest of the time, we want to be completely away in the wilds, and we seldom go to marinas or anything else. And so that's the 2 modes we operate on. Here's some of our trips. If you look at this one, you see the first one is 2,000-mile crossing to Hilo, Hawaii from San Francisco. Felt good. But weather conditions, were between just really nice and moderate, just no rough water. We felt comfortable. It's the first time. We don't even know if we're able to do this. You just never know how comfortable you're going to be until you're out there and just get some hours on. And so we went, this is not bad. This is working. So you can see in 2011 we're mostly we went all the way up to Alaska, a couple times offshore. That was where we really got our early experiences. We're running offshore, and so it's kind of, we jokingly call it an ocean crossing with training wheels, because at any moment when you're heading to Alaska offshore, you can turn right, you're done, it's over. You just say, you don't have to apologize to anyone, I wasn't comfortable, as simple as that. And so that got us kind of used to what we could do and what was possible. And then went down to California, then across to Hawaii, then spent 2013 in the South Pacific. Phenomenal. Not really our style. It's lots of really, really fun stuff, but it's not. A lot of people spend decades there. We spent a summer there and really, really enjoyed it, and probably wouldn't go back that frequently there. Where we would go back to some of the higher latitude places like Norway, New Zealand, places like that. That's more our style. We love adventure. Next crossing that we did after that one was this one, this is from Australia over to Rodrigues, Mauritius. That was a 3,000 nautical mile crossing. So that one's getting to be on the long side. Very few people make that crossing. The normal thing to do is they'll go up to Cocos Keeling and then come back down again. It's a lot longer, but it's shorter legs. Jennifer likes to do things different, and so we chose to go straight across. It's the way it is. It's a joint decision, sort of. So we went straight across. Spent about a month in Australia. So at this point, it's around 2015, and then 2015 to from into 2016, we made the longest crossing we've ever done. This one was a compound crossing where it's 1,700 miles from Cape Town, South Africa to St. Helena, and then it's 3,689 nautical miles, which is, 5,000 kilometers, to Barbados. And so if you look at that trip, the first one was 11 days, so 11 days from Cape Town, 4 days in St. Helena, and then 25, 26 days to get to Barbados. What that means is in 40 days, we spent all but 4 days at sea. So a lot of time at sea.
A lot of diesel.
A bit of diesel there too. You're 100% right. 2017, mostly U.S. East Coast, and then crossed the Atlantic. That was our most adventurous crossing, where every one of those crossings I've shown you were really fairly easy, quite easy, and just nice, just business as usual, no big deal. On that crossing, a couple things happen. When people get experience, you should watch for this. When people get experience, especially in project management, but it applies everywhere. People get experience, they get overconfident. You go, There's a right time to cross, right? But we're not going to go with the right time because we want to be in Ireland and Scotland for the summer. So, we'll see a few lows, no big deal. We've done this a lot. And so on that crossing, we had 3 lows, big ones, and so up to 20-foot seas. We had 2 mechanical problems, never had a mechanical problem. And so it ended up being more of an adventure than one would expect. It was about 3,000 nautical, it was 2,800 nautical miles. And then spent the rest of the time, as I told you, into Europe, and then back to North America into South Carolina. Here's our boat. It's a 2010 Nordhavn 52, delivered in February of 2010. The purpose of the boat, the reason we bought it, was not really to go around the world. The reason we bought it is we wanted freedom. Our goal is to be able to go around the world, to be able to make long crossings, to be able to do all these things. We have no idea if we wanted to when we bought the boat. But we wanted to be able to in case that was what we wanted to, in case that ended up being our interest. Over the years, we put 12,400 hours on that engine. So got a lot of use. And our previous boat in 10 years had 4,100. And so, combined, we've done, more than 1,600 hours of powerboat transits. This particular boat has a John Deere 6068. It's a wonderful engine, just rock solid. In all those ridiculous hours, if you look at, didn't replace the water pump, didn't replace any mechanical component on the engine, just phenomenal, like nothing. We replaced a sensor. I mean, it's amazing. So really impressive longevity, and the engine still runs exactly the same as it did when first day it was delivered. The wing engine's a Lugger 844D. That's the emergency engine. If something goes wrong, this is a single engine boat. When you're going out in a single engine boat, you've got to be a little cautious because I'm a mechanic by background, remember? Things break. They do. Customers come to you with broken stuff. So when people say, diesel engines never fail, they do. They absolutely do. So you need to have a backup engine of some sort. In a single engine boat, we have a small wing engine that will get you home if you have troubles. These engines are not capable of great speed. It'll only do about 3.5, 4 knots, but it will get you there eventually. You don't want to need it, but you need to have something. Carries a fair amount of diesel, 1,744 gallons of diesel. That'll give about 2,500 miles. And when looking at mileage, just my caution on mileage. I'll talk about fuel later. My caution on mileage is it's amazing how poor fuel economy is in the open ocean. I don't know. Like we did a 2-way careful measurement on our boat, and okay, great, we can go 4,000 miles. You can't. Yeah, it's not going to happen. Like, it's about a 2,500 mile boat with lots of comfortable range. Here's past work we've done. Our previous boat was a Bayliner. We, as I told you, put 4,100 hours on it. We wrote the Wagoner cruising guides, Cruising the Secret Coast, just because we spent so much time on the coastline here. And our main goal is show people where the cool spots are. And it ended up, first it was a book, and we ended up putting it on the website. Rigging underway. We talked about fuel management. This is the most important one. The size of the fuel tanks by the manufacturer's specs, unless you're incredibly lucky, is wrong. And the amount of fuel that a boat will pick up is unknown by anybody because nobody runs the tanks to the bottom. It's so nobody knows. So what we do is we run the boat all the way down to empty and recalibrate all the way up by pumping 25 gallons in at a time and calibrating the tanks. We have great fuel gauges as well that we've installed. The advantage of doing that is because you don't know unless you do what I'm describing, you got to be very, very careful. So you have to have a lot of safety margin. If you have to have a lot of safety margin, you lose range. And so by doing that, you get 2 things. You get peace of mind and you get range. It's worth knowing precisely how much fuel you've got. It's also worth knowing it because you can spot problems. It's never happened on the large boat, but on our tender, we bent a prop and the fuel economy was halved, 1/2. And so small mechanical issues can be big problems when you're at sea. And when you start talking about tens of % differences, you may not get to land. So fuel matters quite a lot. Another one is ECU accuracy. That's the engine control unit. They're reputed to be extremely accurate on electric engines, on electronic engines, and they are accurate at rated power. In other words, at full rated power, when the engines are running flat out, the ECU reported fuel economy is quite accurate. That's where the fuel economy numbers come from. That's where the EPA work's done. That's where, and that's correct. But down from that, they're off by a lot. Our engine is off by 13%. And so what I do is I'm always showing the fuel economy, and what I'm doing is I'm pulling the data off the engine. I'm putting a curve to correct it by the amount that we found, so I can show real time the fuel economy. And the advantage of doing that is, again, you don't have to think. And if the wind's against you, you better slow down because your economy is getting worse. And if the currents are against you, you always can maintain the same amount of reserve. So once you say, look, I'd like to arrive in with 250 gallons, then you arrive in with 250 gallons. So good. It's good from a safety perspective, and because we're willing to use the fuel fully, it means that we're able to run faster, because otherwise you have to be conservative, hold back. We also carry deck fuel. The reason we carry deck fuel goes back to what I said earlier. When it's about 2,500 nautical mile range, you can go anywhere on Earth in 2,500 mile range. You can cross every ocean. There's absolutely no need to have more fuel than what's on this boat. But Jennifer likes to set her own track, and so because we're doing some of those longer runs, we absolutely do need more fuel. In this configuration, it'll run around 4,000 nautical miles, so it's maybe a bit more. So this is a lot of fuel. If you do run bladders, a couple things to keep in mind. One is they got to be tied down well. Everyone has horror stories about bladders. Everyone has horror stories. We're caught, it was at sea, the bladder started to move, it damaged things, the bladder got damaged, or we were pumping fuel down below and we got water in there. And there's lots and lots of horror stories. If you look at this one, you'll see me standing on the bladder. Notice it's not even flexing. It's like, it's counterintuitive. If you don't fill a bladder fully, which you think is the right answer because you want room for expansion, and so you wouldn't think you should fill it all the way, what happens is it slams back and forth, and the fuel motion is really hard on the bladder itself, and it can also cause it to move. If you fill it like I have there, which we didn't do the first time, we did every time after that, it doesn't move. It's locked down, and it's also not hard on the bladder. The bladders last forever because they're not shifting. It's just locked down. And so counterintuitive in my opinion, but it seems to work super, super, super well. On avoiding getting water in there, what we do is we've got a short section of hose that hooks onto the fuel and then hooks onto the bulkhead, which means when it's time to pump down below, even if you're in a storm, even if the decks are full of water, doesn't matter. The pumps suck down the tank. You're not outside, you don't have to stand outside, and it pulls it right down to really flat, which makes the tank, the empty bladder, a lot easier to manage because it's lighter when it's not full of fuel, and you get the full fuel in that way. Also, the advantage of pumping it the way I did there is you can run it through filters before bringing it in. Bladders that have been stored a while oftentimes have developed stuff in them. It's really hard to keep them 100% clean, and so you want to filter before you bring that on, or it could be bringing in trouble. Heavy weather. Way we manage that is first of all, it's a stabilized boat. The stabilizers help a lot, but at a point they get overwhelmed, and so when we're up around 10, 12 foot seas, they start to get overwhelmed at that point. So the boat's moving a bit, and as it gets a lot bigger than that, the boat's going to move quite a bit. However, we shut it off once, curious if we really needed it, because a little bit of motion didn't scare us. You really need it. Get that back on. Yeah. Other things we do, the boat's locked down tight, and so things like rails on the fridge, because you don't want to open the fridge and have all the food pour out onto the floor. The tables and furniture, they're heavy furniture, but have them tied down tight, because it means that if you unexpectedly are in heavy weather, nothing moves. And heavy weather can be, it's annoying, but if nothing's moving, it's not that scary. If everything stays still, if everything's running well, it's really not a big problem. What's scary is when you're pounding around and then things are sliding back and forth in the house, and you can hear things breaking. It's a bad place to be. So we're packing the cupboards with either bubble wrap or Nerf balls and just have everything locked down really well. And it's just much nicer to run, much nicer place to be. Night running. We're huge fans of radars. We love our radar. It's a 25 kilowatt, 6 foot open array. It's by far the most important instrument on our boat, other than of course, using your eyes themselves. We absolutely love it. We have light shields for all of the displays. We're really big fans of displaying large amounts of data, but because we have a lot of screens in the boat, you've got to kill all those and get it right down to a controllable brightness, or you just can't see safely. We have red lights in most of the areas around anywhere close to the pilot house. Generally don't use the red lights unless, if we're changing shift or something like that, we'll have them on briefly, but underway, we typically just don't want them on at all. We have a FLIR. FLIR's demo really, really well. It's a forward-looking infrared. FLIR's demo extremely well. For a lot of things, I find it kind of gadgety. I don't find them that amazing, except where there's ice. Oh my gosh. They can spot ice from a million miles away, very small pieces. You can see. So if you're working around ice, I think a FLIR is absolutely a wonderful thing to have, totally worth it. When we're heading into marinas in the middle of the night, we tend to use lights and vision and not really heavily dependent on the FLIR, but different people, different styles. Watchkeeping. We started out with a classic 4 hours on, 4 hours off. Worked fine. We boated that way for years. What happened is, it's the usual thing. When people arrive after a long crossing, I'm tired. Well, of course you're tired. You just did a crossing. And so, not bad. What we didn't like is we didn't see each other. Like we just 4 hours on, 4 hours off. It's like you're not traveling together. It's just not that much fun. So we went to this, over time we evolved and evolved and evolved. And eventually by I think the first or second year, we ended up on what is kind of a bizarre schedule where Jennifer takes the tough one. Night is a million times tougher than during the day. So Jen has the helm between 10 p.m. and 5 a.m. So the downside of that, it's a hard shift. It's a long shift, really hard shift. The upside of that, from only 2 people in the boat, there's a couple upsides. One, I work full time, and so I can still work during the day when I'm on helm. And I'll show you some of the things I can do that we've done to prevent. Well, in fact, I'll show it here. The risk of that is you get distracted and you don't, you're focused at work and you don't remember to look up. And so every 10 minutes. If you don't press a button that you can't reach from the seat, an alarm's going to go. And the reason you can't reach it from the seat is I've read about fish boat disasters where they have the same type of equipment, the watchkeeping alarm, and very tired people are able to turn things off without waking up. And so they still end up wrecking a boat. And so ours, you need to stand up to press the button, and it means you can never make a mistake. It's just not going to happen. We have 0 instances of us falling asleep at the helm. It's just because that's the way you do it. Human error is the most dangerous thing out there. The boat's very reliable. It's humans that make mistakes. So that's kind of our approach to it. Because I'm on the easier shift. It's long, but it's easy. I'm able to work, and if something goes wrong on the boat, I can fix it. I've got all day to fix it, and I'm feeling great, easy to do. So that was the plan on that one. Uh-oh. Automation and reliability. I said I'm a pretty big fan of having lots and lots and lots of data. The reason for that is when there's only 2 people on a boat, and especially in rough seas, it's hard to pay enough attention to everything. I mean, if you've got a big crew, you can you do fine. But I want something where if something's wrong, you know it. And so if it looks really complex, but it's not. It's anything lights up on the bottom, that's a problem. Got to pay attention to that. And then all the data above that, if something lights up on the bottom, then you can see what's going on by looking at the data above that. The display is a Maritron display. I'm a pretty big fan of Maritron just because it's highly configurable. You can do absolutely anything with it, and so all of the data on our boat flows up to that display. There's pretty much nothing that's not on there. 60 hertz boats in 50 hertz countries, a bunch of different approaches for that. The approach that we chose to take is becoming more common, and that is we've got 120 volt and 240 volt inverters, and so the whole boat runs off inverter. And then we've got very large, couple hundred watts, amps, pardon me, of charger on and the way it's working is, the chargers, if you're plugged into shore power, the chargers are charging the batteries, and the inverters running the boat. The batteries aren't running the boat; they're just sitting there holding equilibrium. So it means that you can plug into 50 hertz as long as, and the rest of the boat just only sees 60 hertz. Marinas have horrible power. There's lots of sags. Many people have had damage for refrigerators or damaged microwaves because of sags in a marina. On this model, the sags only hit the chargers. The chargers don't care. They're very well protected. So it means all those problems just go away. Other advantages of this approach are, well, an alternative to this approach is a frequency converter. What a frequency converter does is it takes 50 hertz and produces 60 or vice versa. The problem with a frequency converter is it's one big unit. It creates a lot of heat. If it fails, nothing works. What it really is, if you look closely at a frequency converter, it's basically a charger and an inverter stuck in the same box. And so it's really no different than that. But it doesn't have the advantages. If we have a charger fail, then we still have half our capacity. If we have an inverter fail, we still have the other inverter. And so it's a lot more flexible approach in our opinion. It also does some very cool things. One of them is, believe it or not, if you won't believe this, in Norway or Sweden, when you plug your boat in, some of these services are 8 amps. 8. We have 50 most places, but 8. And so it's just never going to work. But what happened is I bring 2 shore powers on, one running each charger, and so we can adjust to take any power you want. And so if there's 8, okay, we'll take 16, and that's actually enough. And the reason it's enough is, of course, we draw far more than 16, but on average, we draw less than 16. So the inverter's running the boat, and we're bursting up and down, and the poor little shore power system is running flat out and charging, and the batteries are going up and down, but everything just keeps running. And so that system allows us to plug in with unbelievably poor power. It just works fine. And it's cheaper than a frequency converter as well. So those are the reasons why I prefer that kind of design. Another thing nice about it is that we have 9 kilowatts of alternator on our main engine. And what that means is you can run air conditioning. You can run the scuba compressor if you want. Just off the main engine. You don't have to ever start a generator. So we never run our generator underway. Everything runs off a single engine, which is very nice and efficient. Well, looks like you get to talk about logistics.
Thank you, James. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the logistics of the trip, how clearing in and out, and just managing the trip in general. The first thing I did when James says, hey, what about this quick blast around the world? Is like, that's a big thing to try to organize. And so what I did was I like spreadsheets. And so what I started out was trying to figure, well, there's certain times of year to go certain places. And so I kind of looked up all that stuff. And so so in the right-hand side, you can see here I've taken, and this is from a couple of Jimmy Cornell's books, when's the best time to go to certain places and when's the storm season, which often corresponded to when your insurance company didn't want you there as well. So they were pretty much the same. And so then what I kind of put in just roughly what we were planning to do and how long we were going to be there, and it also had speed and distance. And so then I could sort of plug in, okay, if we spent 50 days in San Francisco, when would we get to Hawaii, and then kind of let it flow through. And I would build in the details. So this is a pretty detailed through the South Pacific. And we had also certain hard dates, like New Zealand, we had a certain hard date to arrive in because we had our cat with us and we had them booked for, they had to arrive on a certain date. And so here we have a little gap, how much is kind of gapping. And then I filled it in later. So this is like New Zealand, just we're gonna spend 6 months in New Zealand, 6 months in Australia. And we ended up doing quite different from that. But that was enough to kind of get started so I could kind of figure out how long we could be places and when we were at risk of hitting weather windows and things like that. And so that was a super useful thing just to get my head around when we could be places and what we could do. Weather routing, that's another big part. We did our own self-analysis, so we didn't use a weather router. Even if you do use a weather router, it's good to learn about weather, and there's lots of different sources for it, so you can at least follow along on your own. What we did, planning for the best time statistically, that's kind of one of the biggest things for an ocean crossing, because the weather reports and forecasts, you're going to get 3 to 4 days reasonably accurate, and then it gets much less accurate after that. And your second and third week out, there's just you're just crossing your fingers. And so first thing is go when it's statistically best time to go, and there's lots of good data on that. Depart with a good forecast. With forecasts, we found that wave period being bigger than the wave height was so not just looking at wave height itself, so 12-foot seas on 12 seconds is actually not that big a deal because you kind of go up and down. 12-foot seas on 6 seconds or even 8-foot seas on 6 seconds is a lot rougher. And so that was something we found, is that as the wave period got bigger and bigger from the wave height, it was a lot nicer conditions. What we used is grid data from our chart plotter times 0. That was a WW3 model. When you get into the weather systems, there's a zillion different models. And we used ViewFax, so that's times 0 up there, and ViewFax, which was a very low kind of bandwidth, using a GFS model. And so generally we looked using 2 different models meant that you can compare them, and they often were the same. When models were very different, then the weather is much more unsettled. Sometimes, like around South Africa, the models were always different because the weather is just permanently unsettled there. It's never really a great place to be out in a little boat. And when we were coastal, actually our last crossing, we started using Predict Wind with the ECMWF model, and we found that actually pretty good. That we tried Predict Wind a few times earlier, and it just hadn't really grabbed us, but we quite liked it on our last crossing. I think they made a lot of big improvements. And then when we're coastal, we use apps such as XC Weather and Windy, and then the local forecasts. We didn't find the grid data very accurate as when you're coastal, and you've got really good local forecasts anyway, so that works well. Clearing through. There's every country has its own rules and stuff. We used, in particular in the South Pacific, we use noonsite.com a lot, and other countries' the countries itself's websites. So countries like Australia and New Zealand have great websites, tons of information. Some of the other countries, Tonga, places like that, less information. It's less clear what the rules are. Agents we found really helpful in the South Pacific. We generally didn't use them much other places than that. But we found that places like, even in French Polynesia, Fiji and Tonga, where the clearance formalities are kind of challenging. You have to go, in Tonga, you have to go to 5 or 6 different places and find them and get someone to help you. And so the agents are fairly reasonably priced, and they're just really super helpful. We really should have used one in South Africa because that was just a horrendous. Checking out was just awful.
Took a day.
Yeah, it took a day for us to check out, and we had to try 3 different times and 3 different buildings, and it was just awful. So the officials usually come on board. So that's us clearing through into Vanuatu. So they'll often come out in a skiff or something. Sometimes you're at anchor, sometimes you're on a dock, but mostly they visit you. They don't usually inspect the boat that they might. Sometimes you have to go find them. It really depends on the country. But there's usually good information, and from other cruisers. That's what noonsite.com has great information from other cruisers that have supplied it. Most countries you get a visitor's visa on arrival, and it's usually for 90 days. Sometimes it's less than that. We only got visas in advance for 2 countries. New Zealand, because we wanted to stay longer than, I think you get a 3 months visa and you can renew it by leaving the country, and then you get another 3 months, but we didn't want to be forced to do that, and so we got a 6-month visa in advance. Australia requires you to get a visa in advance, but they do it all online, and it's really super easy. New Zealand, we had to send our passports in and wait for it to come back, whereas Australia, you just submit all the stuff online and it comes back in a day or two or something, assuming they let you come in. Another thing we found super useful is having a printer, a scanner, and a copier, especially in the South Pacific, less so as we got into Europe, but just lots of paperwork. They're sending you stuff, you're signing stuff, printing it out, scanning it in, emailing it back and stuff. So having that got used a lot. In fact, that's a new one because ours broke because we used it so much. Pets, and there's a lot of information out there on pets. First, I'd say if you have a pet and you're considering traveling, get it microchipped and get a rabies vaccination. So there's lots of different rules in different countries, but almost every country wants you to have a rabies vaccination, and they want us to be able to know by the chip that you can identify them. And sometimes there's some lead time on, the rabies shot has to have been done, 3 months before you arrive or whatever. So, and it's not a big deal to have the chip and the rabies, and so definitely get that done. Most of the entry rules for pets we found were for air travel, where you have to do something like 2 days before you arrive, get this test done. It's like, well, it's going to take us a month to get there. And so I spent a lot of time talking to the quarantine authorities at various countries, trying to get kind of a deal where we could be, we're not going to go anywhere, we're not going to be ashore, we're going to be on the boat, but we're not going to get that test 2 days before we arrive. We also found there's a lot of unwritten and preferential rules. So because it's air travel, most of the rules are about importing the pet, especially this is easier for cats, but for importing the pet where you're actually going to bring them ashore and they're going to live there. But on a boat, there's lots of countries that allow you to just keep your cat on board. It's harder for dogs, but I think it's the same thing. So you don't actually have to go through the whole import process, you just keep them on board, they don't go ashore. And we also found these sort of preferential rules where one country has these really onerous rules but if you come from a different country, it's not so bad. So for example, the UK, you cannot bring a pet into the UK on a boat that's going to go ashore from anywhere in the world except from Ireland. So if you go to Ireland first, then you just go to the UK and then your pet's allowed ashore. So the weird little things like that. New Zealand, Australia had the same kind of thing. At the time, Australia had like a 30-day quarantine minimum for pets, except if you come from New Zealand, and New Zealand had a 10-day quarantine. And so that was our one quarantine we did with our pet, was 10 days in New Zealand. And then that allowed us to go to Australia as well. So we were okay with it. We were surprised that we were expecting that having a pet on board would really restrict us on where we could go. But there was only one country we didn't go to, New Caledonia, just because they just had their quarantine process was longer than we were going to be there. And so it just didn't work. And there's our little kitty Spitfire. So he was pretty good on the boat. He adapted to conditions. As it got rougher, he'd find different places to kind of wedge himself. And so he'd just always find a way that he could do what he likes to do best, which is sleep. But he also liked to watch the birds and stuff. So he did really well on the boat. We really love having him along.
The fishing magician.
Yeah, the fishing magician. So he didn't fish, but he would wait until a fish jumps onto the back of the boat and then he'd catch it. So he caught way more fish than we did. We're not very good fishers. So now I'll give a quick blast around the world. So we got about 10 minutes. And I'm just going to cover the highlights and the places that we went, just give you a feel for what we saw and what we did. And there's a quick look at the timeline again. So as James mentioned, we went to Prince William Sound, and that was the ocean crossing with training wheels. And so we did 2 of those, one to Southeast Alaska and one to Prince William Sound, offshore runs. And so that helped us learn how do we do the shifts. And one of the things we learned is that James does not sleep except at night. And so we had to make our shifts so that he got more of the night sleeping shifts, because otherwise he just wasn't going to go to sleep. And just how did the boat work? Did we like this whole doing passages and doing shifts and just being on the boat for that long without stopping? And then, of course, Prince William Sound is just like a fabulous place to be. At the time, we were still working full time, and so we only had we had 3 weeks of vacation. It took us a week to get there, and then we spent a week there, and it took us another week to get back. So it was kind of a learning vacation as well, but a fabulous place to go. Hawaii, that was when we first chance to use some of the things like the flopper stopper you see there, which is super useful. Living in the Pacific Northwest, we never really had to anchor in big swell or anything like that. And that's a lot of the places around the world, you're just kind of in exposed anchorages. And so some way to stabilize the boat at rest is really useful. And we lived down at Waikiki Yacht Club for about 3 or 4 months, and it was a great place to be. It was fun after having been to Hawaii a few times ourselves to actually pass Diamond Head in our boat, and it was also a really good place to provision and get ourselves ready kind of for the next leg of the trip. Palmyra Atoll. This is it's a little atoll about 900 miles south of Hawaii. You have to get a permit to go. You have to have your boat. They've de-ratted the whole island, so you have to get a rat inspection. So someone comes, and this is funny. The guy that came, he used to expecting big ships, and so he comes to our little boat, and he's like, yeah, you're good. So it was like $200. We're like, that's it? You gotta look more. It used to be a Navy base, and so there's all strange things, like you'll see like manhole covers as you walk around the island. It felt very much like something from Lost. And the Nature Conservancy runs it now, and they bring in, sort of guests, it's very well-heeled guests. And what's the kind of jet they run? I forget.
Citation.
A citation. So they bring in a citation, and so you can sit right at the end of the runway as the plane goes over top of you, which is something you rarely get to do. French Polynesia, this was a bit of a difficult run because we had to go to weather. Basically, you're going from Palmyra here across, and so it was a bit of a slog. But it's a beautiful, beautiful country that spans. There's kind of three main areas: so Marquises, which is pictured there. Very rugged volcanic islands, and then the Tuamotus, which are just all atolls. Like there's nothing more than about a few inches above sea level. Fabulous diving, just wonderful, wonderful area. And then the Society Islands with Papeete, and so there's a picture of us in Papeete. I think it was the first time that we plugged in anywhere after leaving Hawaii. So just because there just really was nowhere where to go. That was another place for us to kind of reprovision and stock up, so getting groceries and oil and things like that, and so it's a good stop there. Tonga and Fiji, fabulous diving in both countries, really wonderful markets as well. This is an example of kind of difficulties of clearing. So we had, that's an agent there, and then there's three officials on the boat, and there's another one somewhere else. And usually what you have to do, you go ashore and you find them all up and you put them in your tender and then you bring them to your boat, and the agent does that for you, so you don't have to go figure out where they all are, and so it was a lot smoother process. And you also have to post a bond for pets, and so she helped us out with that too, so that was super useful. And this was our first place where we usually go back 2 or 3 times a year back to Seattle, and this was the first place where we kept the boat for a while and then went back to Seattle, and that worked out well. So Vanuatu, it's about 1,200 miles north of New Zealand, and it's one of the famous things. There's Yasser Volcano, and you can go as close as you feel like to that volcano, which is very different from the U.S. They say, if anything big gets spewed out of it, run. And we're like, okay. Yeah, it was just fabulous. So you take this truck in this rickety road, and you can see the roads going down on either side, and then we got there sort of in the early afternoon, and then as the evening comes, the volcano just gets more and more amazing. It's fabulous. And this was where we did a lot of preparation going from New Zealand. We were entering New Zealand with our cat, and that was like a big deal. We had to have a permit and had to have it inspected, and so we did a lot of that work in Vanuatu. Oh, and that was a kind of a giggle. Mystery Island in Vanuatu. They bring all these cruise ships there, and they have all these locals selling all these local products. And this is the plane that's bringing in all the local products from China. So
the day before the plane arrives.
So we were there a day early. Yeah, it was kind of cute. New Zealand, we spent, I guess, maybe 8 months in New Zealand. Just absolutely loved it. Spent a ton of time in the South Island. We really liked the South Island. The North Island was fabulous, but we really liked the South Island. Fjordland was on the west coast of the South Island. That was that's pictured right there. That was really on our list of places we really wanted to see. And we went through every single fjord that we could get the boat into. And there was one we couldn't because it was too shallow, so we took the tender in there. But we just explored it like crazy. And another place we really liked was Stewart Island, and that's a small island off the southern end of New Zealand. It's interesting. People that live on Stewart Island talk about going to New Zealand, like you're in New Zealand. And this was our furthest south, so we're at 47 degrees, 2 minutes south. And so when we rounded South Cape, and it was our first of we rounded 3 of the Great 5 Capes, and that was the first one. But it's this really wild place that's really windy, and so the rocks and the trees are kind of blown over, and it's just, you feel like you're just kind of on the edge of the world. It's really wonderful. So we spent probably 2-3 weeks in Stewart Island.
Yeah.
Australia, just huge country. It's a continent, huge amount of diversity there. We spent New Year's in Sydney and saw the fireworks. You got to do that if you're in the area. Sporting events, Moth Worlds. We saw the Formula 1 race. Both happened to be in Melbourne. One thing that happened, people often tell us about places we hadn't heard about, and recommend that we go there. So the Kimberley in near Darwin in Australia, was in northwestern Australia. We'd never heard of it. It's like the Grand Canyon, but it's navigable. The only downside is there's giant crocodiles there. But we spent a ton of time there. Really, really loved it. And so Australia, I think we're there for about like 18 months, something like that. I forgot.
19.
Yeah, and of course diving the Great Barrier Reef was also really fun. So this was Mauritius and Reunion. So our crossing we left from Dampier, Australia, and did a 3,000-mile crossing to Mauritius. And Mauritius is known for its giant turtles. So there's me with a giant turtle right there. And it was also our most challenging fueling, where we spent an entire day getting fuel. We had to bring in Australian cash and go to the bank and convert it to dollars in their currency, and then go and buy the fuel, and then watch the truck drive it to our truck, and then that was the easy part. And then getting the fuel.
Yeah, there's no meter on the truck, and the fuel line is 4 inches. And so you've got this thing that you have to carry.
You can sort of see it right there. It's just this giant hose, and so it took us an entire day, but we got our fuel at least. And Reunion also has a volcano. It's a French holding, so it has wonderful restaurants and baguettes and croissants, and so it was really tough to leave there. And it's wonderful scenery in Reunion and waterfalls. And it's about 500 miles west of Mauritius. And from there, we went to South Africa. So I forgot the distance for there to South Africa. South Africa is a really challenging place for boats. There's not a lot of marinas, and the marinas that are there, one of them got completely blown apart in a storm. And so but it's really beautiful. I mean, fabulous wildlife, fabulous scenery. Cape Town is just kind of like being in Europe, and it just really enjoyed it as well. But it's challenging. The Agulhas current that runs up and down the coast here, I think it's about a 6-knot current, and then you get sudden winds against it, and just huge seas can develop. We had one time where it wasn't even that big a wind, and a wave hit us so hard it actually blew one of our forward hatches, our deck hatches, just right off. It just. So it was like not even a serious big wind. So it's a challenging place for boats. St. Helena it's a little island holding about 1,700 miles northwest of South Africa, of Cape Town. And it's where Napoleon was exiled, so it's a British holding. At the time we were there, they were just building their airport, and the only way you could get there was by ship. And they've been trying to build this airport forever, but I think it's finally built and completed now, so the ships no longer goes there. And this is our most interesting fueling, is that they brought out a barge to us. I don't think we ever fueled by barge except that one time. So this was also our most expensive fuel. I think it was like $7 or $8 a gallon or something like that. So yeah, it's crazy expensive. Caribbean next, that was our big long crossing, 3,700 miles from St. Helena to the Caribbean. We didn't end up spending much time in the Caribbean because this is what my shoulder looked like after about 3 or 4 days there. I dislocated my shoulder, so we got lots of rum treatment. So that was my excuse. And then we went to St. Lucia for a bit, and then we actually just ended up hightailing it to Florida because I had surgery on my shoulder. But it's all good now. So we didn't spend as much time as we were expecting in the Caribbean. Bunch of time on the U.S. East Coast, which we were surprised at how much interesting things there was on the East Coast and how much good boating there was. For some reason, I had this concept of it just being kind of like the California coast, where it's just kind of like just not really a lot happening there. But yeah, lots of fun places. We were in Boston for the 4th of July, fabulous fireworks. Another thing we did there was going up to Newfoundland. We're going to spend a summer there. We were going to go all the way around Newfoundland, and we got to the first of the southern fjords, and we're like, oh, this is amazing. And then we just decided to do all of the southern fjords, and we just didn't bother going all the way around. So amazing scenery, amazing hiking, and there's just really hardly anyone there. So then we crossed over to Ireland. And I didn't know much about boating in Ireland before that. I mean, I'd seen pictures of the great scenery, but the coast of Ireland is really beautiful, and you really get a different perspective by boat. And there's some this is Fastnet Lights. That was just as rare. This is the most southern point in Ireland. And there's some really wild lighthouses. This island actually has a hole right through, and a lighthouse. And there's all kinds of little islands like that with lighthouses just perched on them out in the middle of the ocean. And this is Skellig Michael, which is where The Force Awakens, the Star Wars movie, was filmed. And it's hard to get to, but if you get a chance to see it, it's really worth doing. And I was enjoying some beer in Ireland. And Scotland was next. Everyone said that, we were thinking it was just because the Scottish people are proud of their country, but they said, oh, you liked Ireland, but Scotland's way better, the scenery's way better. We're like, and it was, actually, it was amazing, especially the Outer Hebrides, pictured kind of up there. And it was just beautiful scenery, and two really interesting canals that we went through. This is the Crinan Canal that runs kind of along the west side of Scotland, and then the Caledonian Canal, which runs through Loch Ness. You can actually take your boat to Loch Ness. I didn't realize that, so we actually had our boat in Loch Ness. Didn't see Nessie though. And we also spent a bunch of time in Stornoway, which is at the northern end of the Hebrides, and that became, during COVID, we ended up going back there twice, and that became our kind of home away from home. Spent a bunch of time in the southern UK, Liverpool, Belfast. Belfast, not somewhere you'd expect to be a great boating place, but they have a nice marina there and really lots of great attractions. And then lived in London for, I guess, 3 or 4 months. Norway was probably our one all-time favorite country. We just love Norway. Fabulous scenery, fabulous hiking, and the whole coast is you can go from southern Norway all the way up to the top through mostly protected waters, which really surprises. There's a couple places like on the Inside Passage where you're kind of exposed waters, but very few. You can mostly just be on inside waters, so it's a really, that's probably our favorite place. Denmark, you can go right downtown in Copenhagen and more and just like enjoy the city. They have a great Skagen, which is at the north end of the Jutland Peninsula, which is a major shipyard. And then they have a small marina in there too. And so you can go in there and then see all the big ships and big boats being worked on or constructed. Oops, hit that too hard. Netherlands, we spent 2 winters in Amsterdam, so that's kind of a funny place to winter, but that's where we were, because we went from Norway and then we wanted to go back up into the Baltic the following year. Netherlands, some countries it's really hard to find officials to come check you in. The Netherlands is like really on top of it, so they were like, before we even hardly docked, they were like 4 people were on our boat. Sweden, we really enjoyed taking a canal. There's a canal that runs through the center of Sweden, so you can go from East Sweden, from Stockholm, all the way to the other side of Gothenburg. Sweden also is very careful about their coastline, and so we were boarded constantly, especially with the U.S. flag. You see a Coast Guard boat go by, and they'd see our U.S. flag, and they'd turn right away and see us. Beautiful anchorages. The Stockholm Archipelago is a wonderful string of wonderfully protected islands. And also in the Baltic, there's no real tides, and so anchoring and things like that's a lot easier. You don't have to worry about the tide levels and stuff, or leaving your tender and having it get stranded. Finland, this is where we went into Russia. There's a canal that runs, a Saimaa canal that runs from eastern Finland. It used to be all part of Finland, but after World War II, they moved the borders. And so you clear into Russia, you leave Finland, you clear into Russia, and then you clear back into Finland to go. So there's us raising our Russian flag. And inside, it's just beautiful waterways, beautiful scenery, old castles. We never expected to take our boat into Russia. And then Antwerp, from the last stay in Amsterdam, we went by canal to Antwerp and really enjoyed it. Our boat was really getting kind of big for the canals, and so we just kind of squeaked through in a couple places and spent a bunch of time in Antwerp. And our plan from there was to go into the Mediterranean and spend the summer in the Mediterranean. This was, I guess this is March of 2020, which is right when COVID hit, and so we're going to the Mediterranean didn't seem like a good idea. So we ended up going back to Scotland, spent a bunch of time in Scotland, and then went back to Norway and wintered in Norway actually for the most of COVID. And we were worried about because it's dark and it's going to be cold, and it actually worked out really well. We'd move the boat in the morning in the dark, and then when we had about 4 hours of daylight, we'd do stuff out in the tender, and then at night. They called it the cozy season, is that all the buildings are all lit up and everyone has lights. And so it ended up being a really nice trip. And we just bought, we went buying warm clothes, got ourselves all set up. So it worked out super well. So, and then in 2021, we came back to Charleston, and that's where it ended. So if you want to learn more, this slide deck, we will post it on the website. And it has lots of information, tips, techniques, destinations, everything we talked about. And we also have a YouTube channel. And This is, so you can see this from if you pick up the slide deck, some of the select posts that covers a lot of the topics in more detail that we talked about here. And I think we're a little tight for questions, but if you do have any questions that didn't get answered, we can field questions on the website, so just go to the bottom of the page and there's a comment section. Thank you very much, and we'll be around if you have any questions.
Good work.
Thank you.